Bonjour, tertarik untuk melanjutkan kuliah di Prancis? Yuk simak apa saja keuntungan jika kuliah di Prancis. Sebagai negara penerima mahasiswa asing terbanyak kelima di dunia, Prancis menawarkan pendidikan berkualitas di berbagai bidang. Kekuatan Prancis dalam perekonomian dunia juga diimbangi oleh penelitian dan inovasi yang terdepan. Saat ini bahasa Prancis merupakan bahasa internasional. Belum bisa bahasa Prancis? Jangan khawatir. Tersedia juga perkuliahan yang 100% menggunakan bahasa Inggris. Jenjang perkuliahan di Prancis dari tingkat D3 sampai S3 menggunakan sistem satuan kredit Eropa yang menjadi diakui di seluruh dunia. Prancis menjadi salah satu negara dengan biaya pendidikan terendah di Eropa berkat bantuan subsidi langsung dari pemerintah. Biaya S1 dan S2 di Prancis hanya berkisar 40-60 jutaan rupiah per tahun. Selain subsidi langsung biaya kuliah, manfaatkan subsidi akomodasi sampai 40%, asuransi kesehatan gratis, subsidi biaya transportasi, dan kegiatan budaya. Anda juga diizinkan untuk bekerja paruh waktu untuk menambah uang saku. Kangen berkumpul sama mahasiswa Indonesia? Jangan khawatir, Perhimpunan Pelajar Indonesia di Prancis menyambut Anda di berbagai kota. Setelah lulus, Anda akan bergabung bersama ratusan ribu alumni Prancis di Indonesia dan dunia bersama platform France Alumni Indonesia. Dan pastinya, Anda dapat menemukan berbagai kesempatan profesional di perusahaan-perusahaan Prancis terkemuka. 5 perwakilan kampus France di Jakarta, Bandung, Yogyakarta, Surabaya, dan Medan siap membantu Anda untuk konsultasi pendidikan tinggi, bimbingan kuliah, pendampingan pendaftaran, dan informasi mengenai pengajuan visa pelajar. Kunjungi www.indonesia.campusfrance.org untuk informasi terkait program studi, beasiswa, cara mendaftar kuliah, dan pengajuan visa pelajar. Jangan lupa ikuti media sosial Kampus France Indonesia untuk mendapatkan berbagai informasi terkini seputar kuliah di Prancis. Merci, kuliah di luar negeri, pilih Prancis.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information everywhere. In all situations. On every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24. A different take on the news.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Good evening, welcome. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon for our speakers in Europe. Welcome to the last edition of Creative Talks. This is the 4th edition of Creative Talks. As part of the Festival Cinema Prancis or French Film Festival in Indonesia. Before, we have 3 talks in days before. One on film archiving, one on film distribution, one on film co-production and film funding. And tonight, we're going to have a discussion on film restoration. Okay. Festival Cinema Prancis been online since 13th of November up till the 19th of November, and this is the last night of talks. So, when we're talking about restoration, film restoration in detail, the goal of restoration is to bring the missing elements back as close as the original as possible. I know it's a very hard work, and since the 1970s, France has restored several of its films thanks to CNC. It's been working from the late 70s, and as well as various audio and video, audiovisual elements other than cinema. It's been done by INA, the Institut National de l'Audiovisual. So these 2 institutions been doing great works, been doing restoration works on cinemas and audiovisual works in France, and have a lot of experiences that can be shared to us tonight. In Indonesia, restoration is still a rare practice. It's very rare practice. Even though Indonesia has many important audiovisual works that have been produced since the early 20th century, reliving old works is proving to be a real opportunity in country. Because beyond the contribution of technology, restoration is the real market economy that includes all parts of industry, laboratories, operators, distributors, etc. In addition, the spectrum of restored artwork has increased dramatically. Yeah, we see a lot of old films, a lot of old TV dramas on OTTs at the moment. Currently, all audiovisual content is an object of restoration. Because after being restored, the viewing of these contents can attract more viewers. It's open access. In fact, several television stations and cinemas have begun to specialize in broadcasting restored audiovisual content. What is the real condition of restoration practices for films and all the audiovisual art works in Indonesia and in France? Who are the actors? What collaborations are possible between these 2 countries regarding French expertise in this field of restoration? So, tonight we're going to have 4 speakers on it, and all the 4 is at the moment in Europe. So, good afternoon for you all. I'm gonna introduce them one by one after this, and before that, we're going to have 2 speeches coming from the EOS Europe on Screen Festival co-directors. I introduce you Menina Putri. Please, Menina.
Merci Alex, thank you. Salut, bonsoir à tous. Je m'appelle Putri et je suis la co-directrice de l'Europe on Screen. I'm going to stop my French now because it's quite rusty, and as we are going to talk in English, I think it will be better that we continue in English. And thank you so much, everyone, all the panelists, Miss Simone, Miss Beatrice, and Mr. Bruce, also Alex, and also huge gratitude to our festival partners at the Institut Français Indonésie and all the teams that has worked so hard to create the Festival Cinema Prancis in collaboration with Europe on Screen. And tonight's talk is going to be very insightful and also very interesting to listen to. And because film restoration, as Alex mentioned before, is of something that quite rare in Indonesia. And we are so happy to also have Miss Lisa Bona to join us here with us tonight. And then also, it is good to see you, Lisa, again. Yes, and then also I would like to also take this opportunity to let you know that Europe On Screen Film Festival has already started since yesterday, and we have already one film that is sold out, and it's apparently a French film. It's called Farda by Arnes. So the ticket has been sold out. A round of applause for French film in Indonesia. And then again, I hope you guys can also join us in Europe On Screen Online Edition from the 16th of November until 30 November 2020. Thank you so much. And now I will give the screen to my co-director, Noval. Please.
Thank you, Putri. Thank you, Alex, for the earlier introduction. And yeah, I would like to welcome all the panelists here, Simone, Beatrice, Brice, and of course, my long-lost friend, Lisa Bona. It's been some time since we last see each other. Just like Putri said, film talk like this is very important to also enrich a festival-going experience. Although we cannot really go to festival now, but we still enjoy festival in virtual format. And yeah, film restoration is, of course, something that we should learn more, the importance and the value behind the process. So I hope everyone is having a good time here, and congrats once again to Institut Français Indonésie for this year's Festival Cinema Prancis, albeit in a different format of only film talk. And yes, Europe On Screen is still running until the end of the month. There are 2 French films left that will be screened in the festival. One is animated feature Joseph, and the other is romantic comedy My Donkey, My Lover, and I. Thank you, and have a good evening all. Back to you, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you, Putri and Noval. Hope the best for the Europe On Screen. Tonight, we have Miss Lisa Bona Rahman, film restoration practitioners, Indonesian citizen, but at the moment is living in Berlin. And we also have Mr. Brice Amoro from the Institut National de l'Audiovisual, who works with the restoration of audiovisual works and also videos and everything. And from Sensei, the Centre National du Cinéma de l'Image Animée, Sensei in French, we have Miss Beatrice de Post and Miss Simone Appleby. For the first floor, I give it to Miss Lisa Bona Rahman. Please.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. It's so cool to see you here, especially Noval and Putri. All the best for the festival. And yeah, thank you for having me today. And I'm going to start my slideshow in parallel. It's very simple slideshow. So could the technical team please assist me?
Can we have the slideshow?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, good. All right. So as it is said in the publicity in our panel discussion, film restoration is still a rare practice in Indonesia, even though audiovisual content has been made in our region since 20th century. Indeed, there are a lot of potentials in creating film restoration work in Indonesia. So I am personally looking forward to do more. But before that, let me briefly illustrate the current situation of film restoration, especially those which are done with public money in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So since 2013, there is one restoration per year one project per year that is supported by public money. And it is done by Pusbang Film, or loosely translated, it is the Film Center at the Ministry of Education and Culture. So far, we have 4 films. The fourth, I'm not including it in my slide yet because I haven't seen it and I don't have the material. So far we have Clockwise, Darah dan Doa. This is a film from 1950 and restored in 2013. Next one is Pagar Kawat Berduri, or Barbed Wire Fence. It's a film from 1961 and it was restored in 2017. The third one, the one in the bottom, is called Bintang Kecil, or Little Star. It's a film from 1963, restored in 2018. The latest restoration work is called Kereta Api Terakhir, or The Last Train. It's a film from 1981 and was just restored last year. The result of this restoration that we see on screen has been brought on screening tours, mainly to universities or for university students in several cities in Indonesia. There are also several festival screenings, among others, the Jogja Netpack Film Festival or International Symposium, such as the Asia Pacific Archivist Association in Bangkok, Thailand in 2018. It is a little bit different than what we probably think about when we think about film restoration or restored film results that we can see on public channels like either internet platform or television. These films are more shown to limited audience, so to speak. And if we talk about actors in restoration field in Indonesia, like who are the people actually involved in this sector? I just mentioned the public actor, which is the Film Center in our Ministry of Education and Culture. This is so far the most active within our government sector. And then there are also private actors. Like there is a paid TV station called Flick, and also a private foundation that provides like digitization and film restoration services like Indonesian Film Center. And apart from them, there are also technical service providers. And what I mean by technical service providers are companies that has equipment and the know-how to provide restoration services such as Render Digital or Jakarta Digital. The last question posed in the introduction of this discussion is regarding possible collaborations which can be established, and in this context, especially with film preservation and restoration professionals from France. I probably will leave this part for our future discussion at the end of this session. I think personally that international collaboration is very useful and also important because it brings together knowledge, sometimes also fundings, and also a wider platform of access. I want to talk about, as an example, a case that happened to an Indonesian film called Lewat Jam Malam, or After the Curfew, that was restored starting in 2010 and finished in 2012. It's a film from 1954. And this film was done or restored through an international collaboration. Even though, let's say, the initial setup was not as complex as how it ended up to be, but I think now that it has been 8 years ago, I think it's good to look back at it now and see what was done back then and what is the impact today, especially because this month we have actually the digital video version launch of this restoration result done by Criterion Collection in the US. This film, next slide, please. This film was quite a very special case for Indonesian films because of its curatorial circumstances. So this is not a film that was chosen by a public institution to be restored, but it actually came from a choice, personal choice, from Indonesia's probably most dedicated film critic, J.B. Kristanto, and it is pointed out as his all-time favorite. For him, Lewat Jam Malam, and I quote here, illuminates the most authentic aspect of film as active cultural artifacts. It pushes its audience to have a direct, lively reckoning with the past. Lewat Jam Malam is a story about a young guerrilla soldier, Iskandar, who is feeling alienated from the society as well as his loved ones, because the war has introduced him to violence and also its moral dilemma, which have changed him very deeply. He is disillusioned by the fact that the society whom he fought for very quickly moved on from the impact of war without really dealing with its consequences. Norma and Laila, so the two women depicted at the bottom of the slide, are the two main female characters in this story, and they each represent the dilemma of Iskandar's life. The first one, the one on the left, is representing the optimism for the future, what is coming up in the new free country. And the second one on the right, Laila, represents depression and disillusion. Clearly, the film carries a very important subject of discussion for the society in the post-colonial Indonesia. And after watching the film, I could suddenly understand what J.B. Kristanto was saying, and it made total sense to me, because this film allowed me to immerse in not only a time capsule, but also that I feel I'm in touch with the creator, the whole darkness, bitterness that comes in this film and expressed in this film. And what is special also about this film was that the film was created especially for the purpose of exhibiting it in an international film festival in Tokyo in 1955. I think it would have been quite a strong statement to make in Tokyo, as Indonesia also experienced 3 years of Japanese colonization between 1942 to 45. But sadly, the film actually never made it to Tokyo because of diplomatic conflict between Indonesia and Japan. But still, I think this film is a very interesting example of how Indonesian filmmakers wanted to project their new identities to the world. We learned that this international statement was never delivered to Tokyo, but the film actually met its first international audience in Singapore 1 year after, so in 56. So for us, by us, I mean the team that decided to restore this film at the time from Jakarta, Indonesia. It totally made sense to do a collaboration with the National Museum of Singapore to restore this film. Little did we know at the time that this would actually generate a challenge in form of quite negative responses back home, both in Indonesia and in Singapore. Next slide, please. This is just an example of a kind of voice, critical voice that was going around in both of the countries. Our late film critic, Totot Indarto, for example, said that a film restoration that is done by a foreign entity shows that Indonesia is neglecting its film archive or its history for that matter. And we also had similar reaction, although less pronounced, from Singapore, where the National Museum of Singapore was. It is, of course, no secret that there always has been competition in terms of claiming cultural heritage in Southeast Asia. It's certainly a delicate matter in the region because we are historically and culturally related in a very fluid way, which obviously is not reflected in the borders that now exist between our countries. There has always been fights, especially between countries around the Malayan Strait, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, about who has the right of claim to certain cultural artifacts like batik textile or rendang, like this beef stew recipe, or folk songs like Rasa Sayange. And just an interesting note, this very song is actually featured in Lewat Jam Malam in After the Curfew. Next slide, please. The collaboration with the restoration laboratory L'Immagine Ritrovata was going very well. It's based in Italy. And they also brought in a very important element that changed the whole balance of the collaboration, the international collaboration of this project. They put us in touch with the World Cinema Foundation, an organization that was founded by Martin Scorsese and his fellow filmmakers. So suddenly the tide would turn, and this news swept away the bad responses in Southeast Asia and convinced the society in both countries that an international collaboration might not be so bad after all, and perhaps even desirable in terms of exposure in the world stage. Next slide, please. So, however, this new balance also came with a price. Because new partners in and a new setup and new ideas came in, we also had to change the nature of the collaboration, and we had to unfortunately downscale the launch that we planned initially in Singapore in March 2012 in order to make way for a premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. I feel quite mixed, obviously, about this. On one hand, I'm very happy that the film traveled, but it also revealed quite a tough reality that we in Southeast Asia don't have the same possibilities of support and exposure in our own region when it comes to old films or restored films. History is very problematic for us. It's not yet something to celebrate together. We had to send this film away to Europe first so that it can be premiered and celebrated before we can enjoy it back in the region. This shows somehow how the cinema industry operates, obviously, that there are certain powerful hubs, which of course is useful, both culturally and economically, as Alex said in the opening of our discussion. But we also have to bear in mind that it has its own claims. The imbalance is quite clear, but I have to admit that it saved the project anyway. So in the end, looking back to 8 years ago, I think we made the best choice that we could make at the time. The collaboration was super important to reintroduce the film to its audience around the world. So finally, it made its international round and, could talk to so many different people in so many different countries. And until today, it's still continuing to tour the world and even released in digital video format. Other films that I mentioned before in the beginning of my presentation had not had the same exposure yet, But I do hope someday, with more collaborative efforts, we can experience the same impact again with a restored Indonesian film. Next slide, please. If you're interested in reading more about the restoration, I would invite you to download the booklet that we published about this restoration through this link. And I would love to discuss with you again, about this whole complications, about international collaboration, and also its good aspects when we have our Q&A session later. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. So,
Thank you, Alex.
Lisa mentioned a lot about how these complexities on collaborative workings on restoration may have good sides that we can expose to. We can expose films to bigger audience, to the world, and we can give more access for the audience to get the films, but also give us a lot of opportunities to preserve East Asian own heritage. And for the next speakers, we're gonna hear from Mr. Brice Amoro from the Institut National de l'Audiovisual in French. Is going to talk about the technicalities and why we have to preserve our heritage that recorded in videos and other audiovisual elements. Please, the floor is yours, Mr. Amaro.
Hey. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody can see me, and will soon see the PowerPoint.
Yep.
I will need the assistance of the technical person in Jakarta.
Yep.
So my speech will be about 10 minutes long, and I will try to present what INA does as a preservation policy. And I would like to enlarge the debate to audiovisual, video and audio carriers also. My colleagues from CNC will focus on film, their specialty, and I will focus more on the video and audio formats. So if I may have the PowerPoint, I would be happy.
On yet? Okay. Here you go.
Right. So first, a brief presentation of what is INA. Next slide, please. INA is a state-owned company, and the CEO of INA is appointed by the French Ministry of Culture for 5 years. And we have a budget of about 120 million euros, 1/3 of which is public subsidies, and 2/3 of which is public subsidy, and 1/3 is from our own incomes due to licensing, image and sound rights, training sessions, international expertise, etc. And we're basically a bit less than 1,000 people working, technicians, salesperson, documentalists, archivists, etc. Next slide. Yep. So the company was created back in 1975. Before this time, there was just one single huge public audiovisual company in France that broadcasted television and radio. And back in 75, 7 different companies were created. The 3 on the top were TV channels, public TV channels in the time, a radio broadcaster, a company for telecommunication, one for production, and the last one, INA, was created for archiving, researching, and licensing purposes. So the main missions of INA, next please. The main missions of INA are collecting and preserving audiovisual heritage. We're the official archiving center for public radio and television, which means that everything that's produced by public money for French radio, and television, belongs to INA 1 year after their broadcasting. And so we preserve everything that was produced by public companies from the early 30s to 2020, actually. And we are also in charge of the legal deposit, which means that we have the mission to collect everything that's broadcasted in France 24 hours a day for researching purposes. And so for this, we record 170, 180 TV and radio channels 24 hours a day, just for research purposes. Then we give access. Of course, the main issue here is giving access to any kind of user to these collections. So some with licensing rights, some just for research, but the main issue is really giving access. And we'll see later that it has influence on how we restore and digitize our collections. And then the last mission is transmitting. So as I said, training sessions, international expertise, etc. We'll talk about this in the discussions later. Next. So back in the late 1990s, INA began to digitize, to launch its own digital preservation plan. And it was really based on two main issues. The first one was the carriers themselves were endangered, some were ancient, and we could hardly find some playback machines. I'm talking about any kind of video formats and film reels. So we had this obsolescence of material that we had to face. And also there's a huge issue about human skills to make sure that we can still play back these devices as long as possible. And so the digitization became affordable at this time. The digital technology in the late 1990s and early 2000 became affordable. So that's why we started launching our preservation plan. We started off by choosing and selecting some very valuable contents, but little by little we enlarged to the whole collection that we had. And of course, in the early 2010, we had some quality issues regarding the uprising of HD, for example. Next. So these are the main formats that we can find at INA. So as you can see, any kind of professional video carriers, film reels, 35 and 16 millimeters, and also as we have the radio collection, 78 reels, 78 RPM discs, sorry, and 625 tapes. Everything is now digitized and is safely stored in our data center. And so it's now available for our users. Next. So in the early days of digitizing, and everything I say here has its importance for the restoration side. In the early days, the choice we made for TV, for example, was harmonizing every kind of carriers into the digital Betacam, which was in the late 90s, early 2000, the more solid, widely spread carrier that we could find. Of course, in those days, we talked about SD carriers, which means the resolution of the TV at the time. It's much less than HD, which is the nowadays format. I will talk about this a bit later. So everything in our preservation plan was digitized once in SD on this digital Betacam and then transcoded into digital files to make them accessible to the audience. Next. So, next, please. Next slide. Yep. Thank you. This was supposed to be animated, but I'm going to do it on a fixed way. Oh no, too fast. Previous one, please. Yes, thank you. As I said, everything that was preserved at first was done in SD, which means that it was transferred into digital Betacam and then SD files. But thanks to the film reels that we kept, we managed to rescan some of our film reels into higher resolution, as HD, 2K, and even 4K for 35 millimeters. So from the early 2010, we started remastering our film collections into higher resolutions, which means that it could then be accessible for higher quality uses. I'm not going to go into more details technically, but if you have any questions, we'll talk about this later. I'll let my colleagues from CNC talk about how we restore film reel and how we digitize in HD. But just an example with the next slide is a scanner. No, next one. Yep. Thank you. Is on the right side of the image, you see a 16 millimeter image. On the top of it, it's a first scan that we did with our scanner, so you can see scratches and some moistures on the image. And on the bottom side of the image, it's another technology that we use is called as wet gate. It means that these films go through a specific bath, and all the scratches are filled with a specific liquid, and so it removes the scratch on the image that is scanned. So you can see that from the digitizing process, we can really improve the quality of the image that is shot, right? So there's a moving image next. I don't know if we could play it. So you can see this man talking. It's a silent, there's no sound, so just look at the image. Yeah. So you can see on top, scratches and some kind of little sparkling things on the top left, which are moistures actually. This film reel come from overseas French territory, and so you see on the bottom of the image, no scratches or less scratches and no moistures. This is only due to how the film was digitized. No digital restoration at this point, right? Next. So I'll let my colleague from CNC, as I said, talk about film, but I'm going to focus on video now. So next slide. And next one, again, I'll skip this one. All right. So as I said, the early video formats, the early TV formats that was produced and broadcasted in France and all around the world was in SD, which is the bottom left square. The image is 720 times 576, and the ratio is 4/3. It's like a square image. This corresponds to everything that was produced in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s in French and around the world. Now, of course, the use of our clients is more HD. So for every carrier that was initially produced in SD, we have to find some ways to upgrade them, upscale them into HD or even higher resolutions. As I said, for film reels, we can rescan them in higher resolution. But for video carriers, there's no information on the original video that can be interpreted in HD. So we have to digitally enhance and upscale our images to make them broadcastable today. Next. So as I said, there's also the issue of the ratio, the image ratio. On the top left, you see a typical French television screenshot with a French famous singer, Claude François, in 4/3 black and white. And you often see on TV nowadays, when they don't have time to work properly, they just stretch the image to make it fit in a 69th rectangle image. And everything is going fatter of 25 pounds roughly. So of course it's awful, there's an anamorphosis in the image, and that's not what we want. Another way would be to zoom into the image and to cut a rectangle into a square. This causes problems of resolution, definition, and of course the frame of the shot was not as intended by the director at the time. So it's not, again, a good way to work. So what we do at INA when we upscale SD to HD, next, is we deliver No, you went too far. Okay, sorry, there's a slide missing. Anyway, we just deliver a SD, a square image, into a rectangle with black pillars on the sides. So the ratio of the image is not changed, and it's still relevant with the original shot. Next. We also have to face some physical restoration of the video carriers. On the top left, you see a typical magnetic tape out of its box. On the bottom left, you see some moistures inside the tape. This is typical of very humid preservation conditions and storage conditions. And on the right side, you see our technicians working on what we call at INA the clinic. So they operate the videos to make sure that we can still get some image and sounds from them. Next. All right, so here there's a moving image also. If we could play video 3, please.
Playback.
So, yeah. So you see on the left side of the image, the original as it was digitized with all these little white lines due to dust in the player or on the tape. And on the right side, the restored version with no scratches, all right? So for everybody in the room that has already seen ancient video carriers, we all know this kind of defects, and now we have digital ways to correct them. Next. Yeah, I'd like to finish by emphasizing on sound also. Because at INA, as I said, we deal with radio carriers, but we also correct the sound from TV programs. So I won't focus on this, but I'd just like to emphasize on this specific project. We were appointed by the South African National Archives to digitize the audio recordings of the Mandela trial back in the 60s. It was the trial of Mandela and leaders from the ANC, and that led to their life imprisonment. So this very specific audio carrier on the top left is called the dictabelt. It's a vinyl cylinder, and the groove is burned around the cylinder, and it could be played back on the machine that you can see on the bottom left. So it was 250 hours of trial, and it was recorded between October 63 and April 64, and June 64, sorry. Next. So now you can see that on the top right image, sorry, it's the audio spectrum of the sound, which means that on the horizontal line, it's just time, and then the different colors represent frequencies of sound. I would like to emphasize and to use this example to say that as we restore, we always have to face some ethics issues. Do we remove this or that artifact? Is this click really a technical problem, or was it shot at the time? And especially in this trial, for example, many of the testimonies or of the witnesses talked in original Xhosa language, which is a specific idiom in South Africa. And the specificity of this language is the presence of many clicks with the tongue. So for non-Xhosa speakers, as I am, for example, we don't have to make the mistake and consider these clicks as artifacts. So we always try to work on what was intended to be done at the time, and especially for these historical trials, to make sure that we do not remove anything that could damage the original signal. So for example, and we're going to hear an extract, here you will hear first the raw version of one of the Mandela speech in the trial. Please proceed.
Yep.
Number 5.
I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people.
So as you can hear Mandela's voice. You can hear some crackles. I hope you could hear them, really. And these are typical of dust or little technical problems due to the aging of the carrier itself. When we restore, we try to remove these technical crackles, but not to remove anything else. For example, noises in the room. For example, the chair crackling, people coughing, etc. We keep this sound as they are a testimony of what was happening in the courtroom itself. Next, please. Sound 6.
During my lifetime, I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people.
So, as you may have heard, I hope, the voice is more present. We keep the ambience of the room. There's little hum of the air conditioning, and we just remove the technical crackles. So we keep the historical trace of what was said, but remove the technical crackles. And I would like to end with this last one, saying that, last slide, sorry, saying that a restoration is always one step of a whole process, and the quality of a restoration always depends on what were the steps before, the preservation conditions, how the carrier was handled, repaired, physically repaired, how it was digitized, and then how it was digitally restored. But it's a whole process, and every step of the way is important to make a good restoration. So it's not just a technician issue, it's also logistics, storage, etc., etc. And the quality of a restoration also depends on the use that you want to do with it. Is it a public screening? Is it just to show little clips on Facebook or whatever? So the quality of the restoration is not an absolute forever. It depends on what's the use and what tools you have. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening, and I'm open to any questions now or later.
Okay, thank you, Brice. Actually, I have one small question for you. How many hours at the moment archived in INA? How many video hours archived in INA at the moment?
We actually preserve 2 million hours of programs.
Okay.
But, it's roughly 1 million hour of TV and 1 million hour of radio. These
2
are
million hours of
the collection that
2 million hours of the what in a divine as a very important artifacts, right? Because must be curated, right?
It's basically it's everything that was broadcasted on French TV from the and radio from the early 30s.
So all was broadcasted, archived at the moment. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Brice.
My pleasure.
That's very interesting information on how audiovisual were archived in France, outside the cinemas, outside the film, I mean. So the TV productions and audio productions are also archived and restored for research purposes. And for the next speaker, this is Mrs. Béatrice de Past from the Centre National du Cinéma at the L'Image Animée, CNC. since I've been focusing restoration in films, French films and international films, the floor is yours, Miss Beatrice.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to present you this afternoon the different mission of French CNC, Centre National Cinematography and Moving Image for Cinematographic Heritage. At first, I speak quickly about CNC's history. If you can show the PowerPoint and the first slide, please, and the next slide. Yeah, CNC was created after the Second World War in 1946 to support, first of all, cinematographic industry and help cinematographic creation. CNC also negotiated international deals like Bloomberg's agreement in 1946. The specific organization of CNC is founded on the collect of taxes on all companies who make business with moving image, theater at first, and after television, and now internet platform. And CNC redistributes those taxes to creations. It's a virtuous circle. In 1969, CNC had a new mission, protecting film heritage. Next slide, please. We can understand that mission around 4 points. At first, financial aids for French heritage institutions like Cinémathèque de Toulouse, Cinémathèque Française, Institut Lumière, and small institutions who protect cinematographic heritage across French territory. Twice, it's also an aid to support to international institutions. CNC have international expertise and restore, by example, film for Tunisian Ministry of Culture or for National Archive of Mongolian Republic or for the FDCP at Manila, like Simon will explain to you after. Third, CNC manage in Bois d'Arcy a very important collection of old films, like the old Actualité Française, Ina's his owner. That collection is more 1 million of cans. That cans are preserved in special storage, described in a database, restored, and after, film who are restoring will be present in festival in France and in different archives in France, and also in different archives who belongs to the FIAF, International Federation on Film Archives. And fourth point, CNC help rights holders to make us use of their catalog. Next slide, please. Digital area is a difficult time for cinematographic companies. They hadn't digital copy, and it's necessary to help them to exploit. A century of French cinema can't be seen by spectator at that moment. Also, CNC help rights holders. Help them to find material in a laboratory. It's the start to national inventory in 2011. It's necessary to know where is and that material holders can digitalize. All cans are open in laboratory to recognize if it's a negative, a countertype, or a copy, and so on. And to have also information on their chemistry state. After, when holders know where is material and which chemical state, CNC give money for digitalization and restoration. It's a fund to digitalize cinematographic heritage, who starts in 2012 with the European Commission's agreement. Next slide, please. Why CNC organize that aid? First, access for large public in theater, television, expand legal offer on internet, preserve and pass down heritage to next generation, cinematographic heritage. That film are concerned by that aid, silent film, speaking film, short films, feature film, fiction, documentary, animation, all film that you can see the poster. Aren't concerned newsreel, advertising, and TV films. Next slide. Now I present to you the results of that fund between 2012 and 2020. 1,496 files were examined by an experts group, and 1,113 films were restored. Total funds attributes represent more 66 millions of euros. Next slide. In that slide, you can see the evolution of the aid during 9 years. We can note that CNC gave less money than 2 last years than the 7 previous. Next slide. Here you can observe the repartition between short and feature films, documentary and fiction film. Majority, it's feature film and fiction films. Next. And now, in conclusion, that marvelous cake or camembert, who represents the different rights holders who receive money by CNC to restore a part or all their catalogue. That diversity is a French specialty and the result of more 70 years of CNC policy. The upholding of many independent companies. Some of them, like Pathé or Gaumont, lived since the end of 19th century, and CNC helped them in the using of their catalogue. Next slide. And on that last slide, you discover some feature film who return on theatre many years after their first publication on screen through CNC help. And thank you for your attention. And now Simone explain you how she restore color film with her teams inside CNC laboratory. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Beatrice. And now, also from CNC, Miss Simone Appleby, please, the screen is yours.
Hello, nice to meet you all. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here with you today. So I'm Simone Appleby. I am the head of the Film Archive Lab at the CNC. So 10 minutes is a really short time to be able to discuss film restoration in detail. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what restoration is at the CNC. Can we just have next slide, please? Next slide, thank you. So slide just before, thank you. So, as Beatrice said, we were created in 1969, the Film Archive Lab. We are the third largest film archive in the world after the Library of Congress and Gosfilm Fund. As Beatrice said, we have over 140,000 film titles, which means over 1 million film cans. Our lab is situated 30 minutes outside of Paris. We are both photochemical and digital lab. We can process black and white and color, and we can also restore digitally. We have 3 different scanners, one scanner which was made especially for us so that we can make scans from film formats from 8mm to 96mm film. Next slide, please. So just before I begin to discuss our restoration workflow with you, I just wanted to basically discuss very briefly what restoration is and what restoration is not. So as you can see from the slide, it's very clear. Restoration is an accurate and faithful duplication of source material, and it's not a modification or enhancement of the source materials, for example, colorization. Remastering sound mixes, we're not going to take a sound that was in mono or stereo and convert it into Dolby Atmos, for example. The FIAF will say that the film archives are the guardians of the world's moving image heritage. So it's our responsibility as archives to protect the heritage and to ensure that the film restoration remains a direct and accurate replica of the source material. So as Beatrice said, when we restore either photochemically or digitally, it's to provide, other than restoration and preservation, access to the public, which is something very important to the CNC. Next slide, please. Before we're going to begin any restoration, we are going to do a mechanical reparation. So that basically means we are going to roll through the film and look at it on a table and see in what physical state it is. So before we can actually do a photochemical or digital restoration, we will repair splices, we'll repair perforations and tears so that they can be handled later. Next slide, please. In parallel to doing the physical restoration, we are also going to research the film. It's very important as an archive to understand how the film is made, especially if it's a film process that is not standard and that was different, such as the Francita, which we will see later, so that we can restore the film as closely as possible to its source material without interpretation. Next slide, please. So here you can see our photochemical restoration workflow. Photochemical restoration is actually making a direct duplication of the actual film, which is a surrogate copy. The CNC has a policy that all single negatives are duplicated photochemically, which means an intermediate of a negative or of a print. We will consider that a film is fully safeguarded when it is viewable in a form that faithfully replicates its visual and oral content. As you can see, you'll go from negative on the left to a dupe positive, to the dupe negative, and then finally to a print. We have new processes installed at the CNC, and we will be beginning in 2021 the duplication of 5,000 nitrate single negatives that were not done during our nitrate duplication processes in the 80s and 90s. Next slide, please. So the advantages of making a photographic print, as you can see, is that it's a complete duplicate. There's minor information loss. It's cost efficient and time efficient. However, the disadvantage is that you will automatically copy all the tears or the problems that are on the original will be copied onto the safeguarded print. And also you will lose one generation. At the CNC, we can only do a 35mm version of that if we have over 50 different formats. So formats that will be under 35mm or over 35mm will have to be done digitally. Next slide, please. So here you can see our digital restoration workflow. So the original, which is the negative, will be scanned, which will then be restored digitally on a computer and graded. And then you will go to a film out, which will then, you can have a digital negative, you can also have a DCP, and you can also have an LTO tape. Now, what's interesting in this workflow is that you can see that there are two parts where you can actually physically see the negative. That's on the original, and on the top right is your film out. This enables you to actually see your image at any time, which is something that archives are quite concerned about in the future, because with a DCP and an LTO, we do not know if in 50 years' time we will actually be able to see a physical image. Next slide, please. So the advantages and disadvantages of this workflow: digital restoration can go beyond the physical copying of surviving original materials, and at times we can do many things. In the photochemical restoration procedure, which is duplication, we cannot get rid of color problems, we cannot get rid of tears, we cannot get rid of scratches unless we wetgate, but only then wetgate printing can get rid of minor scratches. So if we feel that a film is very badly damaged, we will prioritize a digital restoration so that we can then film back out onto film and have a clean, as much as a clean as possible negative, without, of course, taking out artifacts that were part of the filming process. Hairs that were in the gate will be remaining. Instability that was due to the technical process at the time will be remained. But we will see this in the clips that we are going to have a look at. Next slide, please. So there are many enemies of film, but the three main enemies for the purpose of this presentation that I'm going to just discuss with you today is nitrate degradation, dye and silver fading, and vinegar syndrome. So the most serious problem that we will have is the deterioration of plastic film support. Nitrate degradation is a slow chemical process that occurs because of two factors: the cellulose nitrate plastic itself and the way the film is stored, which will make the film lose its image, and eventually it will decay and become extremely inflammable. Color fading is caused by spontaneous chemical changes in the image dyes. Many older films take on a distinct purplish cast, which is caused by the fading of the cyan and the yellow image dyes. And this can be reinforced and accelerated if the film is not stored in proper conditions. And then vinegar syndrome is when the film is also decaying and you will begin to have a vinegar smell. And once this syndrome is in effect, you will actually find that the film, it becomes very brittle and its degradation will just continue and continue. And the only way to get rid of this syndrome is to either freeze the film, duplicate it as quickly as possible, and make a new film out. So I want to show you a few clips now that show these problems. If we can go on to the next clip, please. Can we play the clip? Yes. So this first clip is a basic restoration of a 75mm Lumiere film. Now, we scan this in 8K. When you scan a film, you're going to want to scan it in the highest resolution possible. On the left, you will see the raw scan, and on the right, you will see the stabilized frames. When you scan a film, the first thing you're going to do when you restore is to be able to stabilize the image so that you can then take out all the other artifacts that are due to deterioration of the film. So here you can see some big tears. You can see the gelatine that has been taken out on degradation. And these are the first things that we will do once we have restored the stability. So now you can see the restored image. Again, the raw scan, and once it's been taken out. Once we have taken out the larger tears and the bigger artifacts, we are going to do like an automatic process where we will just take out dust. So here again, you can see a raw scan. And the restored image. Again, the raw scans and the restored image. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a film that was done in collaboration with the Philippines. The film is Gina Uha Aiko. So this is an example of severe dye degradation and the purplish cast that you will get. It's very hard to be able to retrieve this kind of color. So we worked with a color scientist who created an algorithm for us to enable us to retrieve some of the colors. You can see that the vinegar syndrome degradation in the middle of the image was not retrievable. This film was scanned in 4K. Again, when you scan, you're going to always want to scan your film in the highest resolution possible so that you can have the best quality image to be able to show at a later date. And also you want to ensure that when you scan, you overscan, which means you oversample so that your useful image area will be 4K, but your actual scan will be over 4K. So for some scanners it's 4,300 pixels, for others it's 4,800, so that the image area itself will be 4K. Next slide, please. This is another film that we worked with a Tunisian film. The film is Goa by Jacques Baratier. It's the film with Omar Sharif. It's another example of dye fading. This one we were able to retrieve through digital grading. So you can see on the left the colors that we were able to retrieve, and on the right you have the view of the raw scans. This is a film we are working on at the moment. It's an African film, and as you can see, I'm not sure if you can see very well, but they're in the middle of the frame. There is some, I don't know if we can go back a little bit on this. If we are able to go back a bit on the video, onto the freeze frame. So on this frame, and maybe you can't see very well because of the PowerPoint, there is some mold that's in the middle. So you can see some mold in the middle, there's a mold on the outside. This is also something that is that you see very often in a lot of films. For this African film called Bal Poussière, we had mold on every single frame. And because there was movement, we had to be able to restore frame by frame the entire film. Next film, please. Next slide. So the films I showed you were standard format films, and the CNC doesn't just work with standard format films. As I explained earlier, we also work with different formats. The Francita was a particular format which was created by Francis Vell, and this film, Maurice Vell, sorry, this film was 3 images shot simultaneously onto a 35mm frame, black and white, and it was one of the first color processes that was made on film, and the film was shot through a red, green and blue filter. So to be able to understand that, we had to do a lot of research to be able to understand which of these 3 little frames on the negative was the red frame, the green frame and the blue frame. Once we managed to determine that, we had to separate them out and then put them all onto a separate timeline to reconstitute the colors, giving them each red, green and blue. Can we have the next video, please? So here you can see the 3 frames as black and white. We determined that the red was on the lower right, the green and the blue. Once we did that, we separated the 3 frames. And as you can also see on the right, you have some kind of parallax going on where you've got images overlapping. That's because when the film was shot, each of these frames were not exactly shot at exactly the same spatial time, which means that you would not exactly have the same movement, which was something that we needed to correct as well. Gaspar color, this little clip that we're seeing now, is also a different color process, which was mainly used for animation. And here, this was red, green, and blue shot sequentially. So one frame would be shot with a red filter, the second frame will be shot with a blue filter, and the third with a green filter. Because it's animation, you can stop process it, so it's one frame after the other. So I just wanted to give you like a very brief overview, next slide please, of the different processes of film restoration that we do, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions and if you want to know more about restoration at the CNC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miss Appleby. We have to give 4 of you a round of applause. Maybe I prefer to call you, the 4 of you, as magician rather than restorator, because you do magic. Okay, I would like to invite all the participants in Zoom meetings and all the viewers coming from YouTube to, if you have any questions to our distinguished speakers, please do it in the chat box. And I would like to set the questions to the speakers. But first, we're coming from Wan Fajar. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Wan Fajar. I remember that Tiga Dara restored version screening on cinemas before, back in 2012, 2013, but only for a few days. So we have a lot of, Indonesia have a lot of old movies archive, pre-independence. So what's the problem in Indonesia in the context of restoration? Okay, I think the question is towards Miss Lisabona, because Cinematheque have a lot of old movies archive. Okay. Up to that, so what's the problem in Indonesia in the context of restoration? Maybe Lisabona can give a broad explanation on it. Please, Miss.
Okay. I hope you know that there is no simple answer to that question, but I can outline a few problems that we face in terms of restoring film in not only in Indonesia but in general. This applies to productions around the world. First of all, film is produced with a certain technology, and the technology is not always easily available today if the film was produced in the past. For example, in Indonesia, we no longer have analog film lab. So in order to do what Simone, for example, described she does every day, we have to very carefully choose which facility we can choose in order to be able to work with the raw material we have in Indonesia. And then, of course, the next issue would be what kind of technical workflow that we choose to adopt in order to restore the film title that we have. Each film restoration is unique because each set of raw material poses different problem. Like you saw some pictures in the presentation of Simon and also Brice that every single medium, every single format has their own problem, and therefore, especially with cinematic film, each restoration is posing us a different difficulty. The second problem, I think, and this is quite specific to the legal situation in each country, is about copyright. In Indonesia, we have a situation where the law for copyright is not very stable, and there is very little clarity in the application. So, and we also have the problem that film production companies are short-lived. So most of the time, if we see a film that was produced in as late as 1980s, for example, or even 1990s, the owner of the copyright is not around anymore as a company. So often in doing film restoration, because you have to clear the right, like for example, what Beatrice presented, this very colorful cake that she presented, yeah, this is a very big effort. And sometimes it's close to impossible to do in Indonesia because simply there is not enough legal avenue, and the owners of copyright sometimes have already ceased to exist. So those are, I think, the two main problems that we face in Indonesia, which slows down the process, which makes it impossible for us to do hundreds or thousands of restoration in such a short amount of time. So hopefully this answer is satisfying you.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. So, not to also say that in the context of film preservation, Indonesia have a very unique features, how to say that, very unique position. We also very hot because we are equatorial, and we're very salty because we're surrounded by oceans, and that's not the big, that's not a good or ideal situation for preservations. That's why almost all the celluloids that we have in the archive is not in the best conditions. Okay, I would like to skip to the next question coming from Maharani. I would like to ask, how is the sound enhanced in some of the older movies? What are the technologies used to match and transfer the right sound with the restored movie frames? Okay, maybe I would love to be answered first by Brice and then by Simon for this question. Screen is yours, Brice.
Yep. Well, sound is often not really. I mean, we less often talk about sound than image, and it's really a problem because when you have a bad sound for a movie or a TV program, whatever, you really can't stand for too long. Your eye can get used to a damaged image, but your ear is totally intolerant to damaged sound. It's really awful. So yeah, we have to focus on sound also. And the best way is really for us, for example, at INA, is to mix different kind of sources. We have the chance to have to often have different copies of the same program, one with magnetic sound, one with optical sound for films, for example. And so both of them have advantages and defects. Magnetic is more likely to be processed, is higher quality in general. But we often try to mix different sources and make sure that the defects that you find on one copy, you won't find the same defects on the other copy. So by mixing the copies, you can improve the sound. But as Simone said in her presentation, it's always the aim is always to be faithful to the original. We don't remix, as she said. We don't do stereo or 5.1 from mono sound. We just remove the defects of aging of carriers, but we don't reinterpret the original mix of the film. So, as you saw on Simon's presentation, the very physical degradation of film also affects the sound track of the film. You can still find dust and little scratches on sound, and so what you see on the film reel, you hear crackling. So you have to remove them. So to make a long story short, mixing the sources and make sure that you don't remove any of the original recordings, but just the time artifacts. Simone, I know you have many things to say.
Simone, please.
So I can't speak for sound because we do not do sound at the CNC, but for image, we are never going to take away something that was a defect of the process of the time. So if the camera, for example, the Lumiere films, they were unstable by nature. So we are not going to change the stability of that and make it completely stable like a digital film you will see today. What we will do, however, is maybe stabilize it a tiny bit so that you have comfort of vision, because if we do not do that, you're not going to be able to look at the film. And also, if you want to see it on TV today, it would be refused. But what we will do is also keep artifacts of the time. If it was a camera scratch that was due to the way that the film was shot, then that will also stay. If there's a hair in the gate because the film gate wasn't cleaned, we will also keep it. Effluve, which I don't know what we call that in English actually, if there's any problems of development at the time, that will also stay on the negative, because that's how the film was shot and shown. So the only time we actually enhanced a film was actually the Francita, because the Francita had many artifacts due to the actual process of the film. But when we scanned the film, we had to blow it up because each tiny frame was about the size of an 8mm frame. And so we scanned the whole frame 4K, so each little image would be around just under 2K. So that already is an enhancement of that procedure. And also, because you would have spatial and temporal problems because of the actual process, it would mean that it would hurt your eyes. So the spectator wouldn't be able to actually see the image because there would be like a ghosting around the characters. So there we would take the decision that we would actually make sure that you can see the characters, and we would leave the fringing around the frames that you can see. So it's a fine line that's between ethics and enhancing and what digital restoration can actually do today.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Alex. If I may add a little thing.
Yes.
The main issue. I mean, the first thing that we correct regarding sound, going back to sound, is synchronization.
Yeah.
Because often there's a little, there's a drift between the image and the sound synchronization, and I don't know if anybody has already seen an unsynchronized video, except for this Zoom meeting, which is totally unsynchronized.
Yes.
Yeah. It's very destabilizing.
We need image stabilizer for Zoom then.
But when you watch a movie or any kind of program with the lip sync not correct, it's totally awful. So yeah, this is the first thing we correct, and then we try to remove the aging the defects of aging of the carrier.
But that's interesting because some films that were dubbed, a lot of films in the 80s, well, before the 80s even, when they would do the sound afterwards in the studio, and the sound sync sometimes is awful and completely out. But that's the way it was shot, and that's the way it was presented at the time. So do you leave it that way, or do you try to sync it as much as possible?
Yeah, that's
No,
the big question.
When it's naturally unsynced, we leave it this way, of course. And if I add another example, is sometimes we have some multi-language production. For example, for TV series, we have one actor playing in English, the other in Spanish, the other in French. This is due to the production, international production at the time. So everybody is out of sync. Everybody's redub after, and the redubbing is awful. So yes, we keep it this way because it's the kind of vintage dubbing at the time, and it's naturally.
I have something to say about this. I mean, when you work in a lab restoring films, actually syncing most of the time is not done to dialogues. We don't match dialogues to the speakers because exactly of what you were saying. Sometimes films are shot and dialogues are added later, or films are shot in multiple languages and then was mixed in one languages for each version. When I used to work in a lab, we used to have like the parameter is to sync non-speech audios, like because that is a more reliable cue to sync your multiple version audio tracks, and most of the
like
time
doors.
it works. Yeah, it works in a good way because you're not bound by the tempo of each language and each speech. But of course, I mean, problems in audio synchronization during the analog time is very different than today. And I think our audience is also not very much used to listening to unsynchronized sound anymore, unlike Zoom audience.
Unlike Zoom audience, okay. So here,
That's a very interesting point of audiences today. A lot of audiences are not used to seeing sparkle on film, dust on film, or films that aren't stabilized. And so it's also educating audiences of what film was at the time, because we used to, before digital projection was out, we used to watch films in 35mm, and there would be the film weave in projection. Yeah. And we would see that, and there would be projection flicker, and that would be okay as well. Today, when you go back and you see a 35mm print, most people don't like it anymore because they're so used to seeing a very fixed image on the screen, and they don't want to see flicker anymore.
Yeah, but that's the condition of the medium itself, right? The medium is not having that weavy situation, unlike the back in the celluloids. Okay, I want to move to the next question coming from Ali Jaya Melio. Oh, I think these questions I would love Miss Beatrice to answer from this very long age of CNC works on restoration. For restoration, how often it's done automatically with some algorithm, I mean? And how often it's done manually? And do we already use artificial intelligence to help with digital restoration? If yes, could you give some examples? Miss?
Okay. We found R&D automatically. I explained that we convoke the expert group who read the file that owners send to CNC to explain the project of restoration, and the experts decide if it's a good project, on technical point of view, and the other side, and if a good project of valorization, because it's difficult to give money if the film was restored for nothing, for if public hasn't access to the restoration. And also it's study the place of the film in history of cinema.
Okay.
If it's important movie, aesthetic point of view, sociologic point of view, or technical point of view. And after learn each points, they decide if it's important to restore now the film. Because we have not now many money to consecrate to the restoration, digital restoration, and it's important to choose the
which
good
one
project.
Yeah, which project?
And the other question, it's the artificial intelligence. We have you don't use this technique now in CNC, but Simon want to try something on. We think that's perhaps a good technical for some problems, but not to restore all the
defects. Yeah.
Could I add
Yeah,
something?
please, Simon, please. I know.
I think we need to be very clear about artificial intelligence, because it's a word that's used and abused today.
Yep.
Artificial intelligence is already used in restoration today. As soon as you use a software like Diamant, MTI, or Phoenix, or whatever is on the market right now, that is artificial intelligence. You're already restoring the film using artificial intelligence, because it's algorithms that they're using to restore. Some of it's done automatically, and a lot of it's done manually. But manually means that you're still working. So manually will mean that you're working frame by frame, but you're still using algorithms, digital algorithms, to correct something digitally. So that, in a sense, is artificial intelligence. But it's not artificial intelligence where we would expect it to do the entire film on its own.
Okay. So I think the question is the manually done, is it learned also by the machine itself, so it can be duplicated for the next project? I think that's the question.
Oh, no, you can't.
You cannot. Okay.
Because not one frame will be the same.
Of course.
So it's not because you've done one particular restoration on one film, you can apply it to the next. Because even if you rescan the same film a second time for any particular reason, your film would have moved, so it will not be in the same position. Because that's the nature of film. It shrinks and it expands, and every time you want to scan, you're going to put it in a special place, which we will call a desiccator, so that you can make it supple enough to use it, so it will expand the gelatine, and so your pixel will not be the same.
Of course.
And also, if I may add something also,
please.
It's really in a business where it's a mix between very high technology and very
craftsmanship,
handmade, tailor-made know-how. And this is one of the main issue that every people working in this industry has, is how to make sure that there's still a human eye and ears that are necessary to make sure that the algorithm does the right thing. If I look at, for example, the Beatrice right now, and the bookshelves behind her, some of our filters, for example, may consider all the vertical lines as scratches and remove them. So if I restore the image of Beatrice right now, there would be no books on the shelves, because the algorithm, the filter would be too strong and all the vertical lines would be removed. So you always have to make sure that every kind of tool you use is humanly checked, and this is why it takes so long to train and to practice and to have experience to be a good restorer.
Okay, so it leads to the next question from Jumadi. What's the study background do I have to take if I want to be a restoration specialist? Okay, this is the big question. Please, maybe we can start from Miss Beatrice. What do I need to study to be a restoration specialist?
I think it's necessary to know well the history of cinema, to understand how film was made. Because to make a film, it's necessary to have a man who thought the story, and that man have a culture and an history, and it's important to know that history and that culture, and know the technology that he used to translate in image his thought and the think of is a history that the story that you want to make in image. It's very important that know this history, and after it's necessary to have a good practice of technology, and to compare the history and the new technology, because like Simon and Brice explained, sometimes technology killed the specific and historic marks of the presence of history in the movie is very important, and new technology sometimes erase this history, and the good restorator must have the 2 points: good technology and the knowledge of the past.
Okay. So history of the cinema and history of the technology. That's one of the most important knowledge you should have. Lisa, maybe? What did you study to be a specialist?
I studied film preservation and curatorial, which equipped me with knowledge on the archaeology of filmmaking and film exhibition technology. But what I find is very instrumental in my learning process was an internship, because you can read as many books as you want, watch as many videos as you want, and listen to panel discussions as much as you want. But especially when you work with film, it's something very physical. You have to kind of feel how the film reacts in your hand. Some films are very fragile and brittle and dry. Some are very sticky and humid. There is not a single way to learn how to treat it, and therefore it's very, very important to decide on taking very hands-on education if you want to be practicing in this field. It's really like how people do archaeology, or how painting or architecture restorers do their job. There is nothing else that you can do than to learn and familiarize yourself with the material, and that you can do in different universities around the world.
Yes. Brice, how about you?
Well, I'm not a really good example, because I'm basically an agronomic engineer.
Okay.
Well, it leads to everything.
So what did you study to get here?
But as Lisabona just said, there's nothing like practicing and handling things yourselves. You can go and make internships in labs. There are some schools. I'm more familiar with the European training panel, but for example, we talked about Immagine Ritrovata in Bologna, in Italy.
Bologna.
There's a summer school every 2 years over there, where you can see, practice, and really get familiar with films. There's also at INA some training about different kind of fields of restoration, film handlings, digital color grading, etc. There are also schools in the United States. There's the Rochester. I mean, Simon knows this better than me. So there are some possibilities of training, but there's no such a diploma as I'm an official restorer. It's more like people with a very good knowledge, as Beatrice said, of audiovisual history, films, video, etc. Just to make sure that you understand that this defect that you see on the image was caused by this problem on the original carrier, or it was shot this way, or it was
intended to do
printed
so,
this
and
way.
everything. Yeah. Simone,
Oh, yeah.
how about you?
I studied film and photography back at school, and then I worked in post-production in film labs, not in restoration to begin with, but mainly the production of film. 75mm large format IMAX was one of my specialities, and so I worked there for a very long time, and then in post-production. So I understood the whole process. And little by little, we did restoration as well, and I became a restoration assistant, and now I'm head of the lab. So at the CNC, so it's a great transition. Most of the people at the lab have learned on the job, and they do training as well. They've had lots of technicians within France who do digital restoration trained on the job, and that's the best way to learn. You've got to have hands-on experience.
So, okay, I have, because the people here has been timing me up. Okay, I'm going to the last question for, I think this is for Beatrice. Is there any possibility for a cooperation between France and Indonesia, between CNC, INA, and Cinematheque Indonesia to restore most of the Indonesian classic? Or maybe some training for trainers that we can do together between countries? Please, Beatrice.
Yes, it's possible to collaborate around restoration of Indonesia movie, like we made with Gina, the Philippine movie. It's necessary to have an agreement between two institutions, Indonesian archive and CNC, and if necessary also that Simone have time to work on this project. But if you study several months before the begin the project, all the difficulties of the project, I think it's possible to find a good moment to do it. But it's necessary to have an agreement between two institutions, and perhaps also it's possible that CNC restore image, and INA restore sound, and we can find an agreement like that. Yes, it's possible.
Okay.
And at INA, we already did some specific contracts with film collections. For example, in Cuba, there was this film reel collection in Cuba that was digitized and restored at INA in France. And as Beatrice said, it's often a collaboration between several institutions. that, for example, for training sessions in France or abroad, for service providing, for consultancy, advising and assistance in any kind of aspects of the digitization project. So INA and CNC are I mean, we do it every day, and we're pretty happy that you mentioned train the trainers. It's something that we privilege. It's a privilege for us to try to launch something and then to make our partners go by themselves. That's what we did with South Africa, for example. I talked about the Mandela trial. We digitized the Rivonia trial, but then we trained the South African technicians to continue digitizing all the other trials of the apartheid era. So now they can do it by themselves. So yeah, it's something that can be done, definitely.
Of course. Thank you very much.
By example, INA. For example, INA and CNC were partners in Algeria to train conservation men who made inventory of collection and so on. It's important that each institutions bring his specialties and their knowledge, special knowledge.
Actually, we have passed the time that given to us for this discussion. Is there any last words or last question for each of you? Lisa, last words for this discussion for all the participants?
I'm not gonna die. Last words.
Not last words. Okay.
No, I guess thank you so much for making this panel possible, and I really enjoyed listening to colleagues and also listening to the questions, and I really hope that real collaboration is in the horizon soon.
Wow, please.
Thank you.
Will do. Simone, do you have anything to say for the participants?
No, just thank you very much, and just for people who want to restore, we have stagiaires who come. We have internships as well, usually French students who come. We actually have a German student who's with us right now, but she's French speaking, and she's with us for 6 months to learn restoration. So that's also a possibility, and we'll be happy to see you.
Brice?
Well, yeah, I could sign what Simon just said. So I totally agree with the. We often also welcome some interns, or we had some people from Mongolia, for example, lately coming to digitize and restore some audio collection of theirs. So yeah, we'll be happy to welcome anyone, and maybe sooner or later, when all this Zoom thing would be over, we'll meet in Indonesia and work together with CNC and some of the attendees of this Zoom meeting.
Beatrice, something?
No, I think it's well to colleagues of different countries come in our institution. It's a practice. It's the good way to learn, to restore.
Okay. Another round of applause for all the speakers here. Thank you very much for the introduction to digital restoration, introduction to restoration, introduction to magic, I think. It's introduction to magic. So thank you. Thank you also for all the participants, all the viewers in YouTube, all the participants in Zoom meetings, and also for the endorser of this program, L'Oreal. Participants who stay until this moment will get a L'Oreal package. That's what the committee said, and the committee will contact all the winners. Thank you very much for tonight, and thank you very much. Good afternoon and good for all the speakers in Europe, and we'll see you all again in the next discussion. Thank you.